أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وأما إن كان من أصحاب اليمين فسلام لك من أصحاب اليمين أما إن كان من المكذبين الضالين فنزل من حميم وتسلية حجيم إن هذا لهو حق اليقين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Today we are gathered here again on a Friday and we are in the Azah of Imam Hussein wa Ahl Bayt. One of the biggest reasons that Namaz Jum'ah wa Jum'ah, Ruz Jum'ah, the day of Friday is important. It's belonged to Mawlam Imam Mahdi. Is the day that reminds us to be realigning ourselves with Ahl Bayt and bikhusus ask for Faraja wa Imam Zaman. There's a dua that I read before, Allahumma arrisni binafsik فإن لم يعرف نفسك لم يعرف نبيك اللهم أرسني بنبيك فإن لم يعرف نبيك لم يعرف حجتك اللهم أرسني بحجتك فإن لم يعرف حجتك زللت ديني. It says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from our nafs, that if we don't know our nafs and continue in this path, we don't know our Nabi or Rasul. And then it says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let us understand our Nabi, because if we don't understand our Nabi, then we don't understand our Hujjat. And if we don't understand Hujjat, we are in loss. So, why is it important to be here at the beginning of the Majlis? And imagine if the Sahib al-Aza is Hazrat Az-Zahra alayhi salam, who is carrying it Imam Mahdi. So those two should be enough for us to have this pride that we are here on time and we start the Majlis Agha Imam Hussein and Musibat Ahl Bayt, because the Musibat of Ahl Bayt actually started on the Ashura. It was that day that our Imam got shaheed and his family got slaughtered, but that was the beginning of our Aza and the beginning of Matam and difficulty for Ahl Bayt, بخصوص Hazrat Zahra alayhi salam and Aulad Imam Hussein. So inshallah with توسل به آقا مهدی علیه السلام، شفای تمام مریضان و آموزش پدر و مادر گذشتگان ما، کسانی که the people who before us have passed away but they showed us the pathway. I've said before, when I was a child, maybe 5-6 years old, I remember then Majlis Imam Hussein, there was an old guy that I'm sure he's not in this world anymore, but he always remembered the brothers and sisters who participated in the majalis and made a prayer for them. So it's like yesterday that happened to me. So that's why I keep mentioning that we need to remember our guzashtagan, our people who have passed us, and make pray for them. Inshallah, they are mahshur by Ahl Bayt, and inshallah one day we get the benefit of our dua and they make dua for us, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of the Holy Prophet and his holy family, please recite the second salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the reappearance of our awaited Savior, please recite the third salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The wasiyah that I have tonight is about that time when the family of the Holy Prophet is being taken as captives. And they are accompanied by the heads of the shuhada on spears. And wherever they go, these heads are paraded and the family of the Holy Prophet along with them. And people ask who these are. And the poet tries to capture the response of each of these ladies who tries to answer them. Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. ज़बां पर मदहा है बाग़ अली के नौनिहालों की गुलिस्तां से नहीं कम मजलिसे नाज़ुक़याल, गुलिस्तां से नहीं कम मजलिसे नाज़ुक़यालों। जगह जब मोली शय ने तो हातिफ ने कहा रो कर यही बस्ती बसेगी फातिमा के नौनिहाल, यही बस्ती बसेगी फातिमा के नौनिहालों। जब आता जिक्र बेटों का तो ज़ैनब रो के कहती थी खुदा बख्शे अभी क्या उम्र थी उन मरने वालों, खुदा बख्शे अभी क्या उम्र थी उन مرنے وال درے خیمہ پزینب پیٹ کر سر کو یہ کہتی تھی ارے لوگوں خبر آئی نہ رن سے میرے لا ارے لوگوں خبر آئی نہ رن سے میرے لا کمر کس کر علی اکبر نے جب شملہ رکھا سر پر بلائیں اٹھ کے لے لی ماں نے گھنگرو والے بال بلائیں اٹھ کے لے لی ماں نے گھنگرو والے بال گرے جب شاہ گھوڑے سے ندا ہاتف کے یہ آئی زمیں جھاڑی ہوئی ہے فاطمہ زہرا کے بعد زمیں جھاڑی ہوئی ہے فاطمہ زہرا کے بعد لوں کی زبان پر مدح ہے صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد جب لٹ کے کربلا سے اسیر ستم چلے سجاد سربرہنا بدرد و علم چلے روتے سروں کو پیٹتے پابند غم چلے زینب نے لاش شہ سے کہا بھائی ہم چلے مرنے سے آپ کے میں یہ ایزا اٹھاتی ہوں دربار میں یزید کے سر ننگے جاتی ہوں دربار میں یزید کے سر ننگے جاتی ہوں ہے میرے مسافر کرب و بلا حسین ہے میرے غریب میرے میلخا حسین ہے تجھے نہ پانی کا خطرہ ملا حسین ہے تمام تن تیرا ٹکڑے ہوا حسین پیاسے گلے پہ خنجرے بیداد چلے گیا ہے تڑپ تڑپ کے تیرا دم نکل گیا ہے تڑپ تڑپ کے تیرا دم نکل گیا اے نین والی کی بذات تجھے ملی اے کربلا خدا کی امانت تجھے ملی اے خاک میری ماں کی ریاضت تجھے ملی لے آئے زمین شم میں امامت تجھے ملی دامن تیرا بھرا میری کھیتی اجڑ گئی سرحد میں تیرے بھائی سے زینب بچھڑ گئی سرحد میں تیری بھائی سے زینب بچھڑ گئی یہ کہے کہ سر کو پیٹ کے روئی وہ دل جلی آ کر نجف سے حال میرا دیکھو یا علی گردن رسن میں آپ کی بیٹی کے ہے بندھی کہتی ہے ماریا سے وہ باچش میں تر چلی ہے میں کربلائے معلّہ میں لٹ گئی پردیس میں میں آ کے برادر سے چھٹ گئی پردیس میں میں آ کے برادر سے چھٹ گئی کیا لطف زندگی کا جو نقشہ بگڑ گیا کیوں کر نہ تڑپوں بڑا بیچ پڑ گیا اس قافلے سے قافلہ والا بچھڑ گیا ہے ہمارا کیسا بھرا گھر اجڑ گیا پردیسیوں نے چھاونی جنگل میں چھائی ہے، بھائی نے میرے ایک نئی بستی بسائی ہے، بھائی نے میرے ایک نئی بستی بسائی ہے۔ مہماں بلا کے ہم سے دغا کی لعینوں نے، کیا کیا نہ ہم پہ جور و جفا کی لعینوں نے، کچھ بھی ذرا نہ شرم و حیا کی لعینوں نے، گردن قضا سے شے کی جدا کی لعینوں نے، خیمہ جلا کے اہل ستم شاد ہو گئے، ہم کربلا میں آن کے برباد ہو گئے، ہم کربلا میں آن کے برباد ہو گئے۔ بھائی یہ میرے سامنے نیزے چلا کیے، تیغ و تبر بدن پر برابر لگا کیے، شبیر شکر شکر زباں سے کہا کیے، اترا نہ شمر سینے سے بے سر جدا کیے، روتی رہی میں وہ سرے شبیر لے گیا، بھائی کی میرے خون بھری تصویر لے گیا، بھائی کی میری خون بھری تصویر لے گیا، فریاد ہم غریبوں کی سنتا نہیں کوئی، کس سے کہیں جو ہم پر مصیبت گزر گئی، چادر بھی منہ چھپانے کو منہ پر نہیں رہی، سر کھول شہر شام میں آئی میں دل جلی، آدھا ہمیں دکھا کے سر شہر الاتے ہیں، اب سامنے شقی کے مجھے لے کے جاتے ہیں، اب سامنے شقی کے مجھے لے کے جاتے ہیں۔ بانوں نے دیکھ کر سر اکبر کو یہ کہا، 18ویں برس پر چھٹا مجھ سے یہ میں لقا، کن کن مصیبتوں سے اسے میں نے پالا تھا، مجھ سے چھڑا کے لے گئی ایک آن میں خزاں، جنگل بسایا گھر میرا ویران کرے گیا، نیزہ جگر پکھا کے جوانی میں مر گیا، نیزہ جگر پکھا کے جوانی میں مر گیا، پھر بول دے کے سر اصغر وہ نوحگر، مجھ بے نصیبی کا یہ ششمہ تھا پسر، صدمہ جو پیاس کا ہوا ننھی سی جان پر، منہ سے زبان نکال دی ہونٹوں پر پھیر کر، تیرے ستم کے لگتے ہی نقشہ بدل گیا، ہچکی کے ساتھ سینے سے بس دم نکل گیا، ہچکی کے ساتھ سینے سے بس دم نکل گیا، دولہا کے سر کو دیکھ کے مادر یہ کہتی تھی، مجھ دل جلی کا لاڈلا فرزند ہے یہی، ہے اونٹ پر اسی کی دلہن سر کو پیٹتی، حلقوم پر چھری اس نوشا کے چلی، سینے پر روز عقد سینا اس نے کھائی ہے، جاتی ہے قید ہو کے دلہن یہ دہائی ہے، جاتی ہے قید ہو کے دلہن یہ دہائی ہے، عباس کی یہ زوجہ پکاری باش کو سقا بھی بنا تھا سکینہ کا رش کے ماں، دریا پر لے گئی تھی بھتیجی کی اس کو چاہ، آدائے دین روکی تھی آ کر اسی کی راہ، یہ ہے نشان علی کا निसार इसकी शान के, शाने से हाथ काटे गए इस जवान के, शाने से हाथ काटे गए इस जवान के। सर पीट कर ये ज़ैनबे बेकस ने फिर कहा, आगे सरों के नेज़ों पर जो सर है चांद सा, है ये हुसैन इब्ने अली शाह करबला, नाना नबी सी के हैं और माँ है फातिमा। मजलूम बेवतन है ये और खस्ततन हूँ मैं, बेगुस्लो बेकफन है वो उसकी बहन हूँ मैं, बेगुस्लो बेकफन है वो उसकी बहन हूँ मैं। सलवात अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद वअज्जिल फरजहum।
Salawat.
अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद।
Today we have a speaker for this weekend is Brother Dr. Shabeer Kirmani. Unfortunately, we couldn't get any flight for him to be here, make it to the Majlis time, so he agrees to do a Zoom today, but he will be here in person, arriving tomorrow morning, inshallah. So we'll see him in person tomorrow in the center. I can ask Brother to start the Majlis.
पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलवात अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद।
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المأمونين المهجرين الذين أحبوا الله وطهرهم تطهيرا. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري.
Brother, I think we're having some sound issue. Can you stop for a second?
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
Testing. Testing.
Yes, we are okay now.
Testing. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لن تنالوا البر حتى تنفقوا مما تحبون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman in Kansas City or across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: what is the future of our community? As you know, and as we are no foreigners to one another, my focus is on the future of our community nationally and globally. That is, particularly in the West and Western philosophy countries, what will the future of our community be like? And I've already given you some data in the years past about what the trajectory looks like, and many of you remember that, I'm sure. In that, the one question that I want to raise at the onset is, what is the future? But in that, I want to focus tonight and the next few nights on some potential solutions that we can come to together to start a conversation around the future of our community, so that the same issues that all community leaders are facing from coast to coast of the United States, from the east to the west, those issues that are common. For example, who will be here in the future? Why are the youth not coming? Why are younger people not coming? Why are they not coming consistently? How can we get them to come? Number two, what is the value that the masjid or the Imam Barga or the Husseiniya is providing? And number three, with respect to this, how does this relate to the mission and the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, especially as we commemorate in Karbala? and the movement of Karbala. What is it that Imam was seeing at that point in time, and what is it that perhaps we are seeing in our time, and how can we connect this to the movement of Karbala? Number four, how is it possible, if possible at all, for us to democratize the mimbar in some way, in some fashion, so that we are able to bridge the gap and the divide from this generation to the next generation? What we're going to be discussing also tonight and in subsequent and future nights is this idea of the Quran and how we can use the Quran in order to be a constitution for our life to better our lives. But this is first going to require us to understand where the Quran came from and why is it set up the way it is and why is it organized in the fashion it is organized in. And finally, we're going to be touching on this theme of the family and the Quran, and how does the Quran give us guidance on how we should have relationships with our spouses, with our husbands and wives, that is, with the children, the parents, and the family dynamic at large, so that ultimately we are improving the quality of life of those who attend the masjid and those who are able to participate in the programs, either in person or online or otherwise. And inshallah, we'll conclude with the commemoration of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, being that it is the holy month of Muharram, inshallah. This is our agenda for tonight. Wherever you are here in Kansas City or wherever you are hearing my voice, on the bottom of your heart, send a salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At the first level, I remind you that the dynamics of, in terms of the world that we're living in, we have people in our world, in our midst, who are living in a society that is developed, a society that has different elements at play. I'll give you an example. I remind you that last year I was in Los Angeles for Majalis, for Muharram. And if you've been to Los Angeles, besides Hollywood, there's other things in Los Angeles. For example, there is Caltech in the outskirts. There's UCLA. These are renowned institutions. But amongst them, you'll find that NASA has a lab there called the Jet Propulsion Lab, JPL, the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. And I remind you that I said last time we left off on this notion last year that, look, the people who are attending the Majalis were jet propulsion engineers or scientists. Jet propulsion is a term which is a subset of rocket science. That is, a rocket scientist has a certain inquiring brain. You cannot come to the mosque and shut that brain off. You cannot park your brain at work and come to the mosque and have a different brain. That brain is functioning at all times. So what we find is that there are these dynamics of these two cultures, these two civilizations, these two views of the world. In fact, it's more than two, but I'm making the example to make it clear so that you and I understand these things so we can lay and chart the course of the future of our generations. Look, if I need to be very frank, and at this stage in my speaking career, I don't have any time to waste. Not that I had any time before, but your time is very valuable, but as is my time is very valuable to make sure that these messages are heard. So what is the first level? The first level and the first movement is, what is the future of our community? And the first thing that we need to discuss here is, if you, at some point in your life, either the first 10 or the first 15 or the first 20 years of your life, if you lived in another country and you came to this country, if you lived in Iran, or if you lived in Iraq, or if you lived in Pakistan, or if you lived in India, or if you lived in XYZ country, and you came to America later on in that journey, whether you like it or not, whether you realize it or not, you have come with certain cultural, religious baggage, as it's known. That is, you have come with a certain framework and a certain worldview. And that informs how and why you participate in the programming. And I remind you, and I give you an example of where I was standing in a gathering. I was talking to one of the leaders of one of the communities in North America, and he was about 40 years old. And he said, Syed, you need to talk to this community. He was from Indian origin descent. And the whole community was predominantly from Indian origin descent. From the subcontinent. And he said, we need to talk to these people. I said, what's the matter? He said, we were cleaning the facility. We had a cleaning committee. And we were cleaning the zarih room, where there are kept the tabut and the alam and the zarih and these things. And at that point in time, he said, I was cleaning, and one of the elder aunts, one of the elder ladies in the community asked me to pass the stick. She says, pass the stick to me. And at that point in time, I take the stick and I pass it to her. And then she gets the way and manner in which I gave it to her, she got a little riled up and a little upset. She said, you have disrespected it. And at that point in time, I said, what do you mean? The President tells me, he says, I was wondering what she was saying. She said, you disrespected it. I said, what do you mean? She said, the stick. So it's a stick. I said, no, it's the stick. What do you mean the stick? It's a stick. So this framework was in that individual, the young man's mind, it was a stick. In the sister's mind, the respected elder, it was the stick of the alam of Abul Fadl Abbas. Now, in this dynamic of the equation of what we're facing in our communities, the dynamic is we need to understand things from other people's views. And one theme that I'm going to be harping on tonight and tomorrow and inshallah in subsequent nights is our next generation, we need to tell them, and I'm speaking to you directly if you're the next generation. If you're under 40, I'm speaking to you, that you need to figure out a way to work together. Why? Because everywhere I have gone, from the east of America to the west of America, from the north of America to the south of America, that is every part of America. And by the way, when I say what I'm about to say, I'm not saying it's just our community. Other communities have their own problems. They have more problems oftentimes. But I'm telling this to you because we are part of this community and we have to solve this problem. We're not going to go solve the problem for the Jewish community. We're not going to go solve the problem for the Christian community. They're going to solve their problem. Similarly, we need to solve our problem. So what was I saying? From east to west, from Florida to Texas to Washington to the west coast to the east coast, every major Shia community in the terms of the city I'm talking about has had some form of arguments and fights between the Shia community, to the extent that there have been lawsuits, to the extent that more and more communities are building. Not because of driving distances, but oftentimes because we can't see eye to eye and because we want our way to be remain way. And as a result of that, what is happening is we are seeing that the Shia community is not always working together, whereas in times it is. The next generation has to figure this out. So now when we come to the future of our community, it's very important that we highlight these points. So one worldview for that young man was, it's just a stick. For the other elder respected sister of ours, our mother, our aunt, it was the stick of the alam of Abul Fadl Abbas, of the flag of Abul Fadl al-Abbas. Who's right? Well, the thing is, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. That is, it is per the actions. That is, actions are judged based on intention. That is, what is your intent? Now, when two people look at the same thing, you may find that for two individuals, it's a different view. In fact, you will be surprised to know perhaps that in Islamic law, the same thing the same situation can result in two different people having to do two different things. I'll give you an example. In Islamic jurisprudence, according to the majority of scholars, if your life as a general Shia, if your life is on the line because of your Shia view, you can do taqiyya, and you are to do taqiyya and hide your belief in order to protect your life. This is the general for you. However, if the marja or one of the grand scholars of the time is in the same boat, for that individual, that ruling may change. For example, that individual in that circumstance may actually not be allowed to do taqiyya because he is the face of Shia Islam, and therefore the ruling changes. So it's important to understand these dynamics of the equation. What you see and what is in your mind, as well as in your heart, matters, as well as who you are and what position you hold, that also matters. So what I'm saying is we need to be culturally aware as well as religiously aware about what are the elements of Islam. And we need to figure out how do people see things and how can we take this caravan and move it forward together in the love of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, together collectively. And not just say that my way or the highway. One of the biggest challenges that I'm seeing in our communities is that this notion that a few people, sometimes one, sometimes two, sometimes a few people have their view of what they believe Islam is, and they run the management committees accordingly. And as a result of that, what is happening is they're saying we're going to run things our way or the highway. Not everywhere, but many places. Our way or the highway. And then they ask the question after that, first it's our way or the highway, and the second question is, why isn't anyone coming? Well, hold on a second. Did you invite them to the table to have a conversation? Did you ask, for example, people ask, why are the youth not coming? Well, did you invite them to the table? If you didn't invite them to the table, then it begs the question, why not? Now, the third element of the equation is it that when it comes to these Hussainiyas and these Imambaras, and I'm going to be focusing on this inshallah in the next couple of nights, is the notion, if you build it, they will come? Or is it that perhaps you need to add value, and when people perceive that value, then they will come? You see, the old model was, and the old paradigm was, that in these majalis, it is the barakah of Imam al-Hussein. No doubt there's the barakah of Imam al-Hussein. I'm not telling you that this is wrong in any way. I believe this myself. What I'm trying to explain is the mindset of people may change based on zaman and makan. So in the old times, and even in other parts of the world, people will come to the majlis because there's a barakah of the majlis, because the Ahlul Bayt attend the majlis. All of these reasons were incentive enough to come. Today, you find that we need other incentives. We need other ways. What are those incentives? And you may find that today's shawarma, today's kubi day, today's chalo kebab, today's biryani is not the food that you eat, but it's something else. People are looking for something else. Although food helps, no doubt. We know this coast to coast. Food will get people in the door, but it may not be enough to keep them in the door or keep them coming again and again. So you may need to figure out, as community leaders, what are those things that we can provide that people will say, wow, this is adding tremendous value to my life, and I need to make sure that I'm not missing it. Because right now, and I'm going to explain this tomorrow, look this word up if you don't know as homework for tomorrow, zero sum. Right now, many people perceive the masjid, the Imam Bargah, the Husayniyah as a zero-sum game. Zero-sum is a term that is used in economics and strategy and business. Meaning what? That people see that it is either religion or it is my secular world. That is, either my work or my school or my X, Y, and Z. If I decide to go to the masjid or the Imam Bargah, or my social life, by the way, if I decide to go to the Husayniyah or the center, that takes away from my work or my school or my social activities. And so, if I don't have anything else going on in these areas, then and only then I'll come to the Masjid Imam Bargah. With the exception of some people who make the time and know their priorities. My goal is not to judge here. My goal is just to lay out the reality as it is, as I see it, in honesty and humility, and I may be wrong. When I come there, maybe we can have a conversation. You may say, Brother Shabeer, that's not the case here. And I would say, Alhamdulillah, let's see how we can take what's happening in Kansas and we can share it everywhere. I'm talking nationally here because I know you have people in your community who come to study and eventually they'll go on to another community, for example, or people spend a few years there and people always move. So what you may be learning here, perhaps you can take to another community or vice versa. You may have learned something that you can bring to this community. It's very important for us to try to tackle these things because if we do not do this, this will be a challenge. First principle. Second principle. The verse that I began this conversation with. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. لن تنالوا البر حتى تنفقوا مما تحبون. You will never achieve righteousness until you give away from that which you love. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. Now, it's very important to understand the language and the verbiage of the Quran. And this is going to be one of the things we're going to try to understand in tonight and the next night and inshallah up till Sunday. That is, many young people ask, this Quran, that if it is a book of guidance, if it is a constitution for my life, if it is something that is there, well, how do I develop a relationship with it? And this is another moment to draw a distinction between those of you who may have grown up in a Muslim majority environment and you came to America when you were young or in your middle ages, between you and the worldview of someone who grows up here. Allow me to explain. If you ask someone who came from the other side of the world about what's the dalil and what's the proof of this, and you say that the Quran says this. So, okay, that's enough. That's the final word. In English, in the Western world, they say it's like the gospel truth. The idea was the gospel was absolutely God's word and you could not question it. Regardless of the fact that the Bible was compiled after Jesus' death by Paul and other disciples, that's another historical issue. But when someone said the gospel says it, it's like God said it with himself, by himself. Similarly, when you come from that environment, you say that the Quran is the absolute truth. And it is, no doubt. I'm not doubting that whatsoever. But what I'm trying to tell you is, if you grow up in this part of the world, you have to first start before by saying, first of all, prove this is the word of God, number one. Number two, then tell me if it is the word of God, why is it not so easy to understand? Why is there complexity in terms of understanding it? Number three, is there a value that it adds to my life? And if so, what is that value? How does it solve my problems? How does it solve my relationship between husband and wife? How does it solve the relationship between children and parents? How does it solve the relationship in terms of how we deal with others? These are questions we have to look at and we have to analyze. So what is the verse? So لن تنالوا البر حتى تنفقوا مما تحبون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you will never achieve righteousness until you give away from that which you love. Meaning what? Lan, that statement in the Quran, it is an exclusivity clause. If and only if you meet this criteria, then. Meaning what? Musa, example, Musa said to Allah, Ya Allah, I want to see you. At which point in time Musa, when he said this to Allah, Musa, Kalimullah, the one who speaks to Allah, Allah responded to Musa, Musa, lan tarani. Musa, you will never see me. It's never going to happen. Similarly, Allah uses that same term, lan qisama laha, lan tarani, lan tanalu al-birra hatta tunfiqu mimma tuhibbun. You will never achieve righteousness until you give away from that which you love. Whatever it is that you love, that has a space in your heart, if you do not sacrifice something from it, then at that point in time, you will never be able to achieve righteousness until you do it. Now, what it is that you love, and what it is that I love, and what is that others love, these are all different things. Meaning, for some people, it's their money, so they need to sacrifice and give some of their money in charity, for example, or to help others. For some people, it's their fame and honor, for example. They may love to be liked by other people, but your environment, the truth requires you to say something that people may not like you for. That is a sacrifice that you may need to make. A sacrifice of time, a sacrifice of, for example, maybe missing out on one social gathering, so you come to the masjid. Missing, by the way, the masjid is a social gathering in some sense. That's also important. Or missing out, for example, on something. Or can we bring the two together? That will be a theme in the next couple of nights. Can we bring these two worlds together and not make it a zero-sum game, and actually be able to provide value? That when people come to the mosque, the Husseini and the Imam Barga, they don't see it as I'm losing out on work or school. In reality, this is the university of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And when you come here, it should broaden your mind, it should open your mind, it should unshackle your mind, so that we are able to understand what is the truth and the reality of the matter. So the first principle, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you will never achieve righteousness until you give away from that which you love. Now, come to the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. In the 60th year of Hijrah, in Rajab, before the 61st year of Hijrah, in Muharram, where he goes and fights on the plains of Karbala, he's in Medina, and at that point in time, in Medina, he is making the statement that he is about to leave. But why is he leaving the city of Medina? He says, I am not leaving for any fitna or any fasad. I am leaving why? That I want to seek reformation in the nation of my grandfather Rasulallah. And he says, do you not see that Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al Munkar are not upheld? That is, no one is promoting good and no one is forbidding evil. That means what Imam is saying, that look, hold on a second, you are just calling it Islam, but there is no Islam in depth. That is, it's just a name of Islam that is plastered on the front. Inside is no Islam. It's like, the thing, the glaze or the varnish or the thin layer or lining that you put on, for example, a wall or some jewelry or something. It's just a thin layer that has said on the outside Islam. Inside there's no Islam. Look at what you're doing. There's no Islam here. There's a moment in time where, to explain to you what I mean, Muawiyah, he comes to the masjid. He used to make these trips from Sham to Medina unannounced. And he used to meet the Muslim world, the Muslims in Medina. And he used to, for example, in Sham even, he used to go to the masjid sometimes. Not because he was trying to pray necessarily, but because he just wanted to see the crowd and make his presence known. And then people would say, wow, this is the ruler, and people have come to see him. So he went to the masjid one day and the masjid was packed. He got very happy. He says, wow, so many people have come to see me. Look at the arrogance, the takabbur. House of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so many people have come to see me. La ilaha illallah. Anyway, he says, so many people have come to see me. He says this to Amr ibn As, the son of As ibn Wa'il. Remember, he was one of the advisors there. And he was the one who had a prominent role in the tragedy of Karbala on the enemy side. Anyways, he says, don't get too happy. He says to Muawiyah, don't get too happy. So what do you mean? He says, don't get too happy. All of these people that you are seeing in front of you, they're all juhala. They're all ignorant ones. So what do you mean? He says, they have no knowledge. He says, so don't be excited and happy that they are here. They're not here for you. They don't even know anything. So what do you mean? He says, let salah end, let prayer end, and I'll prove it to you. I said, very well. And he said, salah ended, prayer ended, and after a few moments, he looked towards the crowd. Amr ibn As, he looks at the crowd, and he says, Qala Rasulallah. So the Holy Prophet said, now his words, not mine. Rasulullah never said that. I'm just saying that this is what he said. Qala Rasulullah. The one who touches their nose with the tip of their tongue will be in Jannah. And when he said this, everyone in the crowd began to take their tongue and try to touch their nose. La ilaha illallah. He said, look, they're all halal. What are you happy about? This was the situation in the state. Another moment in time where after Rasulullah, there's a moment in time where a person comes forward and he tells his friend, why don't you come and sell onions in Mecca? He says, onions in Mecca? He said, yeah, you'll sell it. You'll make a good profit. Come bring your onions. So he brings his onions and then he brings in the bazaar and he tries to sell them. 1 day passes, 2 days pass, 3 days, nobody's buying. 3rd day, 4th day, onions about to go rotten. And he says, hey, you told me, friend. He told his friend, hey, you told me to bring these onions to Mecca and nobody's buying it. And he said, they're about to go rotten. He said, what, I'm going to go in a loss. He says, don't worry. His friend says, don't worry. He goes on the mountain, a high place. He says, Qala Rasulullah. His words, not mine again. He says, the Prophet said, whoever eats onions in Mecca will be in Jannah. And then people began to buy it and everyone bought it. So these things happen. That's why we say the only way you can get to true Islam is through the path of the Ahlul Bayt, and that is the main path. Through them, we are able to get to Islam because there were so many changes that happened after Rasulullah. Not my words. Khilafa wa mulukiya, Abul Ala Maududi, not a Shia scholar. He said, in his view, that Khilafa ended in Islam with Ali ibn Abi Talib. As soon as Ali ibn Abi Talib was assassinated, Khilafat ended in Islam and it became mulukiya. It became a system where you have kingdoms. So the question is, how do we get true Islam to the populace? How do we get true Islam to the people? We first need to understand the fundamentals and the basics so that we are able to make the foundation strong so we can build up from there. So questions with respect to the Quran, some questions that come up. That is, if this book is our constitution, it says, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. And Imam Hussein said, I got up to seek reformation. طَلَبَ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّي. I sought reformation in the nation of my grandfather. And he says, أَمَرْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَنَهْيِ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ is not upheld. Then you and I need to make sure that we understand or try to understand Islam from the lens of the Ahlul Bayt by building a relationship with the Quran and really asking the questions. So why did I recite this verse? Principle number 3. When I was in Iraq in 2015, we had the opportunity to meet some of the top scholars there. When we had the opportunity to meet some of the top scholars there, one of the scholars, and I'm reminding you of this so you always and never forget this question and it keeps in your mind. We met Syed Ja'far al-Hakim from the very famous al-Hakim family, from Mohsin Ayatollah Mohsin al-Hakim's family. And at that point in time, he was telling us that there was a time where many people, when the Ba'athist regime was in power in Iraq, they did many things to undermine the Hawza, the Islamic seminary in Najaf. And he was telling them that many of the scholars had to flee from Najaf towards Qom and other places in order to protect their lives and so that they could continue scholarship. He says, at that time, Sayyid Muhammad Syed al-Hakim, who passed away last year, he was alive. And at that time, he said that if I make the move, perhaps the Hawza will not stand and perhaps it may collapse. He says, I will not leave. I have to stay. When he made the decision to stay, the Ba'athist party, they took him and his relatives and they put them in prison. And they moved from prison to prison for roughly 9 years. In fact, they were in Abu Ghraib at one point in time. And in that environment, they did not stand still and say, what can we do? They had one copy of the Quran that was a worn-torn copy of the Quran in the prison. And Sayyid Syed used that copy of the Quran in order to teach other people who are in the Hawza the principles of Islam based on the verses of the Quran and what he remembered from memory. And Sayyid Ja'far said afterwards, when they got out, they looked at the references and there were 1 or 2 pages here and there. If they were not exactly where he said, they were almost exactly where he said, and they were able to build on this scholarship. Now here's the question. Sayyid Ja'far, he looked at us and he said, look, we are young speakers who have come from America and Canada and the United Kingdom. I want to ask you a question, and perhaps you can take this question back to your communities. He said, look, we were in prison, we were tortured, we were electrocuted, we were X, Y, and Z, all types of torture. And our relatives were killed. Many bodies we never got back. And many people lost blood. This was our sacrifice for Islam. What is your sacrifice for Islam? It was pin drop silence. Up until a moment in time, which I remind you that I got the courage, humbly, to say, because nobody had any response, say, maybe our challenge is different. Maybe ours is not physical. Maybe ours is psychological. Maybe. We don't know. And we need to have this conversation together. Why? Because that person who is in Afghanistan and his family and his loved ones are being killed, that person who is, for example, in the Middle East and being undermined and their family is being killed, those people in Yemen who are being undermined and neglected. I tell you with my hand on my heart, I was in Seattle and a brother came from the United Kingdom on a humanitarian cause, and he was trying to raise awareness, and he was trying to raise understanding about what is going on in the world in the community. And he said he went to one community in Yemen, and there was a mother there who did not have hot water. So she was taking water in a bottle, and she was using an electrical spark to try to get some heat. And they said, "What are you doing? You can electrocute yourself." She said, "I know, but this is the only chance I have to get warm water for my children." And I'm not telling anyone to do this. What I'm saying is, those people who may not have food to eat, those people who may be in prison, those people who may be suffering and are following the path of the Ahlul Bayt, if them and you and I are sitting in Jannah next to each other in the same facilities and the same luxury, that person can complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, "Ya Allah, how is this fair that I had to starve, my children had to potentially be electrocuted, my family had to suffer, and yet me and this person who's living on the high street in Kansas or in the Midwest, who has the nice car, who has the nice house, who has the nice job, who has everything working for them, me and them sitting in Jannah at the same level? How is it possible? How is it fair?" لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. What is it that we are willing to sacrifice for Allah? You know, sometimes we give maybe $100, $200, $300 for Allah. We said we did a big thing for Allah. We sometimes give, maybe we spend some time and we volunteer. We say we give something for Allah. Now look at what we are doing compared to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, if you read Dua Arafah, he says in Dua Arafah, "My Lord, what has he gained? Lost you. What has he lost who has gained you?" That is the ultimate richness, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the ultimate poverty is separation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when it comes to Imam Hussein offering something, he says, "Ya Allah, what do I offer you? I offer you my loved ones, I offer you my companions, I offer you myself, and yet all of it is insufficient. It's too less because you are too magnificent." What is our sacrifice in the way of Allah? And what is Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam's sacrifice in the way of Allah? One principle that you will find: as is your sacrifice, proportionate to your sacrifice in the way of Allah is your reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, the one who sacrifices more for Allah, whatever that may be, because everyone has their own test, you will find that that person's station will elevate accordingly. And if you don't, perhaps not. The fourth principle, which I want to highlight as we draw towards this phase at least, concluding and then towards Masa'ib, is this idea of the Quran. How do we develop this relationship with the Quran? What is the Quran? Number one, first we need to understand this Quran in its essence. And we said, for example, when Rasulallah was promulgating the Quran, I told you that the Quran had a nuzul that was instantaneous and one that was gradual. One that was in Laylatul Qadr instantaneously and one that was gradual over 23 years at that point in time. Now, who compiled the Quran? Who organized the Quran? This is a question that many people have asked and many people often ask. Because if I want to understand the Quran as absolute truth, I need to understand its essence. So was it compiled by Rasulullah, or was it compiled, for example, after Rasulullah? And if it was compiled after Rasulullah, who compiled it? So then I need to understand what is the structure, what is the basis, how did it all come together? And if you come to the Ahlul Sunnah narrative about this matter, you will find, for example, when it comes to this issue from the perspective of our brothers in Ahlul Sunnah, they will say that the Quran was compiled after the death of Rasulullah. That is, it was remembered in the hearts and preserved in the hearts of people who were able to remember it. Remember, the Arabs, even before the Quran and Islam, they were masters in memorizing Arabic poetry. They would memorize long poems by heart. And when they would memorize these long poems by heart at that point in time, they then used the skill in order to memorize the Quran and the verses of the Quran. And from this Ahl Sunnah perspective, eventually, during the first Khalifa and the second Khalifa's time came, then the third Khalifa's time came, Uthman's time. They say that Uthman, he had a commission of 4 people and he had them put together all the verses of the Quran, and eventually this Quran was commissioned and it was sent throughout the world. And this is the Quran that we have till this day. So from the perspective of our brothers in Ahlul Sunnah, they will say, was the Quran compiled during the time of Rasulallah or not? They will say no, it was not compiled during his life, it was compiled after his life during the time of the third Khalifa. The verses were there, but the compilation and the organization, that happened afterwards during the time of the third Khalifa. Now, the Shia view is slightly different here. Why? For example, if you take the works of Syed al-Khou'i makes the argument that the Quran was compiled during the lifetime of Rasulallah. And he gives some proof, and other scholars give other proof of this. Now, there's a few views. Don't take the final word until I finish. The first view is this notion that, for example, Syed al-Khou'i says, look, the Quran was compiled during the time of Rasulallah, because at that point in time, the verse himself was saying kitab. For example, this notion that a kitab is indicating that it's already a complete book. For example, Rasulullah says, with إِنِّي تَارِكُمْ فِيكُمُ الثَّقَلَيْنِ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَإِتْرَةِ أَهْلِ بَيْتِ. That is, in the khutbah, in the final sermon, when Rasulullah is telling the Muslim world, I am leaving behind two weighty things. I am leaving behind what? The kitab and my itra. Kitab Allah and itra. That is the book of Allah. And so the Holy says, if it's not a book, you don't call it a book. From Islamic perspective, you would say verses or some other terms would be used. But the indication that it was a book, that the word book is used, indicates that it was complete at that point in time. So Kitab Allah was complete. This is one argument and proof that the book had to be complete, otherwise it didn't make sense, number one. Number two, the second argument that is put forward oftentimes is that on the deathbed, from the Shia point of view, on Rasulullah's deathbed, when he's on his deathbed and he's about to leave this world, he says, give me a pen and give me a paper so I can write something for you. And when he says, give me a pen and a paper so I can write something for you, at that point in time, one individual comes forward and says, Hasbuna Kitab Allah. For us, the book of Allah is sufficient. Now, he said this in opposition to Rasulullah. But what did he say? He says, for us, the book of God is sufficient, indicating that the book had already been compiled. Otherwise, how do you call it a book? So these arguments are there. The next level is also from the Shia view that during the time of the Khilafah of the first three Khulafa, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he said after the demise and the departure of Rasulullah from this world, he said, my first and primary task is to compile the Quran and put the Quran together. So Imam Ali alayhi salam, in addition to being the founder of the Kufic script and the one who created the Kufic script of calligraphy, he was also the one who compiled the Quran together and put it together. And not only did he compile the Quran and put it together, he was also the one who compiled it, and he wrote a tafsir of the Quran, explaining each verse and why it was there. Now, when this happened, the narrations say this was during the time of the first three Khulafa, towards the later period. And he brought all of the Quran that he had compiled on a camel. When he brought it in front of them, they said, what is this, Ali? What have you brought? He says, I have brought the Quran that I've compiled with a tafsir. They said, we don't have need for this. We don't need this. What was the issue? According to the scholars, they say the issue was, the problem was the tafsir that Imam Ali had wrote, because he had made everything crystal clear as to why every verse was revealed and what was the meaning behind it. And at that point in time, because of this, we would have had clarity about many of the issues that we are suffering in the Muslim world, because we were not able to capture that version of the Quran, which is in the possession, according to some of our scholars, of the Imam of our time, Imam Sahib Asri wa Zaman. Now, at this point in time, there's a difference of opinion on this particular matter, as in some scholars in Shia school of thought, not different school of thought, they say that this book, majority say the tartib of this Quran that Imam Ali alayhi salam had compiled, they say it is the same tartib that we have in this. Now, everyone agrees the content is the same. The Quran that we have today and the Quran that Imam Ali alayhi salam had put together was the same Quran. The only difference was Imam Ali's had a tafsir in addition to it. Some scholars in the Shia school of thought say that perhaps the tartib of that Quran may have been in terms of nuzul. That is, for example, alaq and the verses that came after in order, as opposed to the Surah Al-Fatiha in the beginning. But this is a view that is there amongst the minority. Remember one thing, my dear brothers and sisters, very important, especially my next generation. The Hawza, whether of Qom or Najaf, it is a university. And in university, you have differences of opinion. But what happens is often these differences of opinion do not trickle down to you and I. What do I mean trickle down? Allow me to explain. There's a book called Austerity. I recommend you read it in addition to the Quran and Nahj al-Balagha. And you should read some secular books to help open your mind so that you are not duped by these slogans. I'll give you an example. In our world today, there's gun violence. Children are being killed in schools, and they've been being killed in schools for years in America, and we still haven't been able to do anything to stop it. In Texas, it's clear that that happened, and we still haven't been able to do because there's such lobbying and money that goes in this environment. So slogans will be pushed on us, and if we don't know the truth, we will buy these slogans. For example, the slogan that was pushed on us is the solution to bad guys with guns is good guys with guns. Proof that this is a lie is the shooting that happened in Texas a month ago. What happened? For 77 minutes, the good guys had guns, but they did not do anything to protect the children who were dying. And these are trained professionals, let alone if you give a teacher a gun. Would they know how to run it? These are the best and brightest, the most trained good guys who had guns, and they were afraid to go and confront this person. You think an average person? So it's clear that this was a lie and propaganda in order to sell more. Similarly, I'm giving you another example of trickle down. I'm explaining all of this to understand what trickle down means. Trickle down means you put something at the top and then it will slowly come down to the bottom. In the 1980s is when the rich began to become very rich in Europe and America, and the poor began to become very poor. The economic divide began to get bigger and bigger. Why? They said two leaders. In America, Reagan. In the UK, Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. They said, based on the teachings of economists at the time, that we will implement a system of economics that is based on trickle-down economics, meaning what? We will give tax breaks and look after the richest people in society. And when we look after the richest people in society, then eventually their income that they make will trickle down to everyone else. What is the problem? Those people at the height of society made a lot of money. Or what happened or what did not happen was the money never trickled down. It stayed at the top, and the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. Under the narrative of austerity. Remember one thing, austerity that is cutting welfare, cutting all of these things, it often harms the poor and benefits the rich. But you think that it's good for everyone in society. So we need to be careful about these narratives with respect to what's going on. So similarly, the Hawza has trickled down. The views are there, but they don't trickle down to you and I. There are many different views in the Hawza. There's not just one view. Remember, I told you and I remind you, NYC and Columbia University, these two institutions in economics, they have very different views for solving the same problem of poverty. Columbia says, build the World Bank, build the IMF, build institutions to eradicate poverty. And if you build it, they will come. And NYU says, no. You have to create a demand. So they give the example of call centers in India. They said when call centers were built in India, and the call centers preferred women as opposed to men, this changed the paradigm. I remind you, when I went to India in 2020, they still have signs in the hospitals that say that you cannot, I asked them, it was written there, so what does it say? It says, you cannot check the gender of the child in the womb. Why? Because some people still till this day, unfortunately, they kill off a child who is a daughter, infanticide. But the Quran said, وَإِذَا الْمَوْعُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنبٍ قُتِلَتْ. On that day, the young girl who was buried alive will cry out, for which sin was I killed? What did I do wrong? Similarly, it's happening till this day. But now, how do you shift the dynamics? NYU said, create jobs for those girls. And when they created jobs for women, and the women were seen as economically viable, the way that their parents treated them shifted in these villages. They began to feed them better. They began to look after them better. They began to treat them better, and they began to shift the dynamics. So do you first create the institution and expect people to come, or do you solve the problem and let that do it? This is the same problem we're facing in our communities, by the way. Many people say, oh, we built the Imam Baga, we built the Masjid, we built the Husainiyah. Why isn't anyone coming? Whereas we may need to look at, how can we provide value to the populace by understanding their problems, and through understanding their problems, add that value. So when they come to the Imam Barga, it's not seen as they're losing out from their work or school or their social life, but rather this becomes a vehicle for them to achieve this dunya and the akhirah. So they are able to get their education. Is that against Islam? Of course not. Their rizq, is that against Islam? Of course not. And their social life, of course, the masjid was a complete comprehensive circle for that. So now when it comes to this notion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's message, we will inshallah build on this in tomorrow night and the night after, about the Quran being a constitution for our life. But there are intricacies we need to be careful about in the Quran that we may not realize. For example, I remind you, Surah Al-Asr. What does Asr mean? On one side, Asr means by time. But then at the same time, I remind you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. Surah Al-Insan, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word dahr. Surah Insan is also called Surah Dahr. And all Muslims agree that Surah Dahr was revealed for the Anjatan, for the Ahlul Bayt, for Imam Ali, for Bibi Fatima, for Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein. There's no doubt amongst Muslims about this. وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَعَسِيرًا. They give out of their food to those who are the poor, the wayfarer, and the orphan. All agree that this was for the Ahlul Bayt. And at that point in time, but Allah says, هَلْ أَتَى عَلَى الْإِنسَانِ حِينٌ مِنَ الدَّهْرِ لَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْئًا مَذْكُورًا. Does man not recollect that there was a time where he was not worthy of mention? So what? Asr and Dahr, they mean time. In the English translation, there's 17, 20 almost translations of the Quran in English, and none of them have been able to get to the essence, because the Quran is in Arabic, in the original form. That doesn't mean we don't try to understand in English. No, we do. Or Urdu or Farsi or whatever language. But the true essence is in Arabic. So Asr and Dahr, what's the difference? Asr means ending time, fleeing time, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr. By time, man is at loss. So this time refers to fleeing time. That the time that you have of this life, of this dunya, it's going away. It won't last very long. Use it, it will be up. Make sure you make use of it. You're at loss. Whereas Dahr is infinite, unending time, where Allah is saying that, look, this time that I'm giving you, this time that I've given you on this earth, it came from infinite time. Meaning Allah is saying, does man not recall? Does man not recall there was a time where he was not worthy of mentioning? In other words, Allah is saying, had I not created you out of my infinite mercy, you would not exist. And if you would not exist, time would go on forever and you would still not exist. So it is by my grace, Allah is saying, that you exist. That unending forever time, this fleeting time of this dunya. These are the intricacies of the Quran that you and I need to be attuned to. That's why it's so important to understand. And by the way, if you read the Quran, the Quran will give something to everyone who has an open heart, who is trying to understand. The surface level, you can get there. But to understand some depth, some research is required. So the Quran provides to the layperson, and it also provides to the academic who has dedicated their life. And the more and more you get out of it over time, the more you realize it. So this is very important. The next element is, how do we add value to the congregation? This is what we're going to discuss in the next couple of nights, is how do we make the quality of life of the people who are attending better? Meaning that when they come to the Imam Barga, they say that, look, because of I'm coming to the Imam Barga, I'm coming to the Hussainiya, I'm coming to the center, my relationship with my wife is better. My relationship with my husband, for example, for the sister, is better. My relationship with my children is better. My relationship with my community is better. With other people, I have better people skills. I have better human relationships. These things, when people start saying, hold on a second, I'm doing better in school because of the masjid. I'm doing better in my work because of the masjid. I'm doing better in my social relations with my non-Muslim friends because of the masjid. Then people say, hold on a second. This is not losing time. This is gaining time because it's solving that problem. These are the things that we need to discuss. Inshallah, we'll discuss some practical solutions in the next coming nights. But I say this, my dear brothers and sisters, because as community leaders, young and old alike, we must come together to be able to chart the future of Shia Islam in America. I tell you, because what happened in Albuquerque, New Mexico is in front of your eyes. 4 individuals targeted and killed. 3 of them Shia, one of them who was targeted thinking that he was Shia. All of them under this guise of Shia hatred. Now, you and I know very well, especially you who are from the subcontinent, who may have people, relatives, for example, from Afghanistan or parts of Pakistan, Quetta and Parachinar and Karachi, and places like Kabul and other places, or other parts of the world where you have lost loved ones, in Iraq and other places, simply for their love of the Ahlul Bayt. It is high time that we make sure that the Shia version of Islam is well known so that we understand what is the dynamics of the equation and what is our responsibility. We need to give rise to a new generation that works together hand in hand. What I told you in the beginning, there are fights, there are arguments, but there's hope, and I have hope with the next generation that they will see the big picture. That if we work together, there are benefits for all of us. Simple benefit I'll give you. PR issues. Do you know how many communities they've had PR fiascos that they've had to deal with? For example, anti-Semitism. For example, anti-this, anti-that. They've had to deal with these issues. And when they have to deal with it, it's a time-sensitive, big matter. They pay $20,000, $30,000 per community. What if we engaged one national PR firm as the Shia community and said, we are our go-to company, and we benefit from what is called economies of scale. So we all don't have to pay 20, 30,000. We can all pay maybe 3, 4, 5,000, but we will do it together. We pull the resources and we benefit together. This requires that we come to a common vision and we all work together under the message and the mission of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. This is exactly how Imam Sajjad worked to bring the Shia community together after Karbala. What happened after Karbala? Remember 3 principles. After Karbala, Imam Sajjad did not fight on the battlefield like his father did. He took a different approach. In that time, he had to teach the teachings of Shia Islam in a state where he could not publicly. So he used the du'as of Sayyid al-Sajjadiyya. He used the Treaty of Rights, Rasalat al-Huquq, so people would know what are the principles. Second principle, he had to bring the Shia community together because at that time there was confusion about who's the Imam. What do I mean? Imam Ali, first Imam. Imam Hassan, second Imam, son. Third Imam, brother of the second Imam, Imam Hussein. So at that time, although there was a hadith already, Rasulullah said, and the Ahlul Bayt had told us that after Hassan and Hussein, there will be no 2 brothers who are Imams. But still people had forgotten and there was confusion in the Shia community after Imam Hussein. Some people said it would be the brother, some people said it would be the son. So some people started following Muhammad Hanafiya, the uncle of Imam Sajjad, and he had declared that he is the Imam. So Imam had to prove his Imamat. So what did he do? They used Hajr al-Aswad. So Imam Sajjad goes to Hajr al-Aswad with his uncle, and eventually Hajr al-Aswad gives witness that the Imam is Imam Sajjad. But now the game isn't over. The third level of the equation, now the time isn't over. The third element is that he now needs to bring the Shia community together, because the people who are in the party of Muhammad Hanafiya, their feelings may be hurt. How do I bring everyone together? Imam Sajjad used the institution of the Majlis of Imam al-Hussein in order to bring the Shia community together. Every single time, whenever someone invited him anywhere, he would say, we do not come to joyous gatherings. Someone said, Yabna Rasulallah, it is the biggest day of my life. My child was getting married. Could you please come? He says, we don't go to these gatherings after Karbala. But perhaps if you have a majlis for my father, Abu Abdullah, perhaps I would attend. And the narrations say that on the day of the wedding, there was a special seat arranged for Imam Sajjad. And when the special seat was arranged, the host saw that the wedding has begun or is beginning, and he noticed the Imam is not there. And then he began to look in the crowd. He didn't see the Imam. He came towards the entrance. When he came towards the entrance, he saw that Imam Sajjad was there. He had a reciter reciting the majlis, the latam, the nawha, the masa'ib of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And at that point in time, Imam Sajjad was paying his respects to those who are gathered there. He said, Yabna Rasulullah, you are here, we have a special seat for you. He says, we are these people, they came as your guest. That was until you recited the zikr of my father, Abu Abdullah. Now that you have recited the zikr of my father, these are azadars of my father. These are mourners of my father. And the right is that I give them their due respect. This is how much the Imam worked. This is what the Imam did. He tried to bring the Shia community together with the azab Sayyid al-Shuhada. Unfortunately, some people, not all, but some in our community are dividing others with the zikr of Sayyid al-Shuhada. La ilaha illallah. What must be going through the heart of the Imam of our time, Imam Sahib al-Asr al-Zaman? We turn our hearts to Karbala. The narrations say that after the tragedy of Karbala, Imam Sajjad, through the i'ajaz and the miracle of Imama, after 3 days, he came back to Karbala because Banu Asad, they did not know where to bury the shuhada because the heads had been separated from the bodies. The narrations say that at that point in time, there was the likes of the bodies of the companions and the family members and Imam Hussein, but they were not knowing who is who. At that point in time, Imam Sajjad comes and he says, at that point in time, he says, oh Banu Asad, look, these are the companions. Take their bodies and bury them in this one large grave. And at that point in time, Imam Sajjad says, look, this is my uncle Abul Fadl Abbas. These are the arrangements for him. May Allah give you all and give us all the ziyarah of Karbala to go and see Imam al-Hussein and Abul Fadl Abbas and the companions and the shuhada. That moment in time when he says, this is my brother Ali al-Akbar. Then he says, this is my young brother Ali al-Azghar Abdullah al-Rabi'. And he says, this is the body of my father Aba Abdullah. They didn't know because the heads had been separated. He says, take the shuhada, bury them in one place, bury Abbas in one place. He says, take my brother Ali al-Akbar, Ali al-Akbar, and put him by the feet of my father. Take Ali al-Azghar and put him on the chest of my father. And he says, I will bury my father like this. He buried Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. He closed the grave. But at that point in time, what does he write on the grave? The ulama say, and the scholars say, that on the day of Ashura, the one who had the most thirst, it was Aba Abdullah. Why? Final narration, they give 3 reasons. They say, number 1, when Ali al-Akbar came back from the battle, before he went for the final time, he came to Imam Hussein. He said, my father, he said, Baba, I would show them who I am. I would show them whose son I am. I would show them whose grandson I am. If I had just 1 drop of water. At that point in time, Imam Hussein's heart broke. He said, my son, where is this water? That point, Imam Hussein did not have the water, so what does he do? He has Akbar, his son, touch his tongue. When he touches the tongue, he dumps back Ali al-Akbar. He says, Baba, he says, my father, your tongue is drier than mine. Imam Hussein, he takes his ring and he puts it in the mouth of Ali Akbar. He says, Akbar, your grandfather will quench your thirst from Kawthar. This was the first dalil that the most thirsty was Imam al-Hussein. The second, they say that when Zuljana went towards the battlefield, when Zuljana was there after Imam Hussein alayhi salam was martyred, Zuljana, the horse of Imam Hussein, took some blood onto its head and came back to the tents. When Zuljana came back to the tents, Zuljana went to a 4-year-old daughter of Imam al-Hussein, either Sukaina or Ruqayya, Sakina, and she saw the blood on the mane, on the horse, and she understood what the horse was saying, but she gave a statement. And what was that statement for history? She said, oh Zuljana, I have got your message, but I have a question for you. And what is that question? Oh Azadaro, oh mourners of Aba Abdullah. She said, oh Zuljana, I got your message, but هل سقي أبي أم قتل عطشانا? That, oh Zultana, did my father get water, or was he severed, and was he martyred, and was he killed while being thirsty? Which one is it, oh Zultana? Second dalil, the final one, and after this I won't take your time. They say that the third and the final dalil that Imam Hussein was the thirstiest on the day of Ashura is what? When Imam Sajjad buried his father, he wanted to write something on the tombstone, on the grave of Hussein, on the grave of his father. What do you write on the grave of your father? May Allah protect your families. You write what is going through your heart. The loving father, the caring father, the compassionate father. Do you know what it was that was going through the heart of Imam Sajjad? He wrote on the grave, هذا قبر الحسين الذي قتلوه عطشانا. That this is the grave of Hussein who was killed while he was thirsty. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، صلى الله عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. نعتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين.
Ya Husainam, Ya Husainam, Ya Husain, Ya Husainam, Ya Husainam, Ya Husain. ساقیے کوثر تیرا بابا حسین، ساقیے کوثر تیرا بابا حسین، کربلا میں تو رہا پیاسا حسین، کربلا میں تو رہا پیاسا حسین، یاد رکھے گی تجھے دنیا حسین، یاد رکھے گی تجھے دنیا حسین، تجھ سے ہے نام خدا زندہ حسین، یا حسینم یا حسینم یا حسین، یا حسینم یا حسینم یا حسین، تشنگی تیری فضاؤں میں دعا تھی، مصیبت کارواں در کارواں، صبر سے تو نے دیا ہر امتحان، دین پر احسان ہے تیرا حسین، یا حسینم یا حسینم یا حسین، یا حسینم یا حسینم یا۔ چودھویں کا چاند وہ ابن حسن، ٹکڑے ٹکڑے ہو گیا جس کا بدن، کیسے ہو نوشاہ کا غسل و کفن، کر رہے ہیں لاش کو یکجا حسین، یا حسینم یا حسینم یا حسین، یا حسینم یا حسینم یا۔ الاتش کی تھی فضاؤں میں صدا، کل تلک عباس کا پہرا بھی تھا، دیکھتے ہی دیکھتے کیا ہو گیا، چھا گیا ہر سمت سناٹا حسین، یا حسینم یا حسینم یا حسین، یا حسینم یا حسینم یا حسین، بے کجاوا اونٹ پیاسا کارواں، بیریدا ہے فاطمہ کی بیٹیاں، شمر کے درے سکینہ کی فغاں، تم کہاں ہو اے میرے بابا حسین، یا حسینم یا حسینم یا رحم، یا حسینم یا حسینم یا۔ نشر گاہ کربلا اشک عزا، نعرہ تکبیر ماتم کی صدا، یہ لہو یہ مجلس آہو بکا، آرزو فاطمہ زہرا حسین، یا حسینم یا حسینم یا حسینم یا حسینم یا۔ حوصلہ دیتے ہیں ابا سے علی، मिलती है हर दम हमें क़ुव्वत नहीं, जिंदगी परवाह नए शबीर की है दुआए फातिमा ज़हरा हुसैन या हुसैनम या हुसैनम या हुसैन या हुसैनम या हुसैनम या। आओ मिलजुल के नमाज़े गम पढ़े, अश्क से रूमाल ज़हरा नम करे, करबला वालों का हम मातम करे, सांस जब तक है कहो बस या हुसैन या हुसैनम या हुसैनम
اجماعاً صلوات بلند ختم کنید.
Namaz is at 8:36.
Okay. آید به مشام جان ما بوی حسین، از شوق زند پر دل ما سوی حسین، به مهر حسین کسی به جنت نرود، جنت طلبی بیا تو در کوی حسین، کوچه کوچه کوفه بوی عطر خون دارد، کوچه کوچه کوفه بوی عطر خون دارد، کوچه کوچه رد عاشق تو ای مولا چهره لالگون دارد، از غمت پریشانم در ره تو قربانم، کوچه کوچه کوفه بوی عطر خون دارد، کوچه کوچه کوفه کعبه بوسه میگیرد از لب گوهر بارد، من طواف خون دارم در هوای دیدارت، کوچه کوچه کوفه بوی عطر خون دارد، کوچه کوچه کوفه رد قبله تو میقاتم مکتب تو ایمانم، ای حسین حسین جانم سیدی حسین جانم، کوچه کوچه کوفه بوی عطر خون دارد، کوچه کوچه ای حسین من اینجا بویی از وفایی نیست، من اسیر بیداد قوم نامسلمانم، ای حسین حسین جانم سیدی حسین جانم، کوچه کوچه کوفه بوی عطر خون دارد، کوچه کوچه میرسد به دامانم گرچه دست من بسته، آرزوی تو دارم زیر خنجر دشمن، بر غریبیت مولا اشکی حسرت افشانیم، ای حسین حسین جانم، سیدی حسین جانم. کوچه کوچه کوفم بوی عطر خون دارد، کوچه کوچه سر به پایت افگندم تا نظر کنی بر من، آرزوی تو دارم زیر خنجر دشمن. اهل بیت آقایم من غلامی شانم، ای حسین حسین جانم، سید حسین جانم. کوچه کوچه کوفم بوی عطر خون دارم، کوچه کوچه خون دارم. من که رشته دل را بستم در این درگاه، جان بی بهای من خاک پای سار الله. کوفم بوی عطر خون دارد، کوچه کوچه کوفه دارد. چون پرستوی عاشق بیقرار و حیرانم، چون پرستوی عاشق بیقرار و حیرانم. ای حسین حسین جانم، سیدی حسین جانم. کوچه کوچه کوفه یا حسین.
और शाम का बाजार था, और शाम का बाजार था, और मुस्तफा की बेटियां मौला फातिमा या हसन या हुसैन 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 या हुसैन.
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوسيين، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليكم سائر شهداء كربلاء، خصوصا سيدي مولاي أبو الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام عليك يا سلطان يا أبا الحسن يا علي ابن موسى الرضا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسعل الله تعالى مخرجك وزهورك. السلام عليك وعلى آبائك الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
نعره حیدری.